Very bad.
I started when I was
Yeah,
a kid.
exactly.
We do have another autograph signing later on after this panel, but because their voices were pretty strained at the live duel that we had, we're not going to be doing any voices during that autograph signing, but perhaps as a treat, one last final treat, each of you could do a signature line from one of your characters.
Sure.
From Yu-Gi-Oh!
Wow, it's really laying the law. Any other real strict laws now?
Go Yugi!
Everyone says go Yugi.
Joey, I love you, I always have.
Yeah, I knew that. That's obvious to anybody with eyes.
I summon Dark Necrofear. Or, I'm Jack Atlas, the master of faster.
Rhyme.
It's your turn, Yugi boy.
Grandpa said I could always believe in the heart of the cards.
That's right. Now it's time to duel. I just made that up.
In Providence. Did my retort to Erica count? I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm tired.
Okay, to start off the Q&A, how did you all get into voice acting?
Oh, God, is that what we've been doing? I thought those cameras were
I gotta
small.
start? Wayne, go ahead. Well, I was always a loud kid, doing voices. Along with cartoons, I went to school to study acting. Actually kind of focused on Shakespeare, and now I'm doing cartoon voices. But after college, I was looking to pursue theater, but the money was not there. So I realized I had to do some other stuff, and Backstage magazine, which at the time was in print, I don't think it is anymore, had a thing called the agent portfolio where you mail in $100, your picture, resume, and it would theoretically be in front of all these casting directors. And since I found $100 somehow, I did that. Got really no calls, and then one person, business-wise, called me, and because my resume said I did accents and dialects, he assumed I did cartoons before and voiceover. I had not, but I lied. Went in, booked the job, and that guy knew somebody else at CPM. That guy knew Tony Salerno at CPM. Tony knew Eric Stewart at 4Kids. Eric called me in for Yu-Gi-Oh! And I nailed it.
And Eric Stewart was the role of Kaiba, I believe.
They know.
And he also directed the first several years.
I was a theater guy as well, and my first job out of college was on the national tour of Pokemon Live at Radio City Music Hall. And when that show was over, the producers of Pokemon were casting Yu-Gi-Oh! And I was cast as Pegasus, and I've been working there ever since.
I know that a lot of other actors will say that they started out doing voices as kids, cartoon voices and things like that. But when I was a child, I hated cartoons. No, no. Seriously, I was back in the early '90s. I was working in a record store and happened to actually in the video department of a record store, and bumped into a gentleman looking through the anime section, and we got to talking. And he asked if I had ever considered doing voiceovers, and I really had not. And he said, well, I'm actually a director, and I'd like to have you come in for an audition. So a couple of days later, I went in for an audition. It was for a project called Record of Lodos War. And I actually booked the first thing that I auditioned for. It was the role of Ato. And that kind of, it steamrolled from there. I just started working with a lot of different people, and those people eventually connected me with 4Kids, and then the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! So,
Well, I've always been into theater and musical theater, and when I was really young, I wanted to be around kids. Then I realized I needed something called technique. But I also loved the 80s cartoons, and I loved to impersonate lots of different characters and things like that. But I went to NYU and with a concentration in, I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Acting with a concentration in musical theater, and the head of the musical theater department somehow was connected to this studio somehow, and that maybe they were calling the head of the departments and finding out like where the talent was coming from. So they asked them to recommend a few people just a couple years after I graduated, and I remembered that there was that girl, Erica Schroeder, who just did those weird voices all the time. Wanted to play the old lady on the stage instead of, you know, the 22-year-old. So from that reference, I got Ultraman Tiga, and which was, I think, a big flop. But nevertheless, it was a lot of fun, and I really learned how to do flap because it was like
It was live action.
live action flap is much more difficult. But so it was a good start, and from there, same thing, just kind of snowballed, and you kind of spread your web and get your contacts, and it was all good from there.
Eric has been on Broadway too, just so y'all know.
The Broadway?
The Broadway.
I was walking down Broadway the other day. Oh, you mean?
I am in the theater, a recording studio.
Dan is a theater.
I am.
Dan Green and Florian Shots.
I'm always starring. No, I entered a studio with an automatic weapon. I said, please.
At least you were polite about it.
When I was a kid, I never thought of being an actor. I just wanted to be the characters, and then I realized that wasn't possible. So the next best thing was to pretend that you were. And so I went to Rutgers and got a degree in acting. I went there with Greg, which is where we met, and we also became friends with Anthony Solera, whose name we'll hear again and again. So I'm pursuing acting, and I wanted to be a serious actor. So no TV, please, no film, although I did some silly soap opera stuff and a couple of really bad independent films. But my focus was in theater, and I was getting work, and I have also been on the great Broadway, but and off Broadway, and so forth. But then I started feeling really ambivalent about the business in general. I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be highly recognized in any regard. So get out of here. I'm kidding. No, but I wanted to, this kind of modest sort of life, and agents really don't want you to hear that. Like, yeah, I want to go all the way to the middle. So I kind of stepped away, and it just so happened in.
I'd like to be moderately successful.
Maybe not quite even.
No wonder my agent hates me.
I'm gonna make you tens of dollars.
Because I can't.
So, but Tony was getting involved in doing work with Central Park Media, CPM, and so he asked, "Hey, do you want to do some background voices in some anime?" And I was like, "No." And so, but then he asked again. I was like, "Okay." And then Tom Whalen started. Tom Whalen was working in a position above Tony at the time, so Tom started casting me in a few things, and I don't mean physically. Yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there, and it's become my career for over 10 years. Obviously moving into other stuff outside of just animation. But yeah, that's how it happened.
As a child, I loved radio. The family would gather around the Atwater camp listening to the Lone Ranger and Little Orphan Annie. It's not true. Not that old. But I listened to the wacky DJs doing their wacky voices on the radio, and also watching cartoons and buying or having my mother buy me children's records, which was a trend in the 70s. They would take cartoons from TV and strip them down to their bare audio essentials and put them out on these big vinyl discs that you could play. And I said, with the visuals stripped away, I said, hey, those are good voices and funny things, and I can do that. So eventually I did radio for a while and realized what I really loved about radio was not saying, hey everybody, it's 7:20, 20 past 7, coming up next, but was doing the wacky voices on commercials and stuff. And eventually, when radio started to turn crappy, I was able to concentrate on I built a demo reel of enough character voices and sent it around and answered a blind box ad in Backstage magazine, which is essentially an ad that says, we can't tell you who the producer is, but we are casting for a cartoon of some kind. Sent in a cassette demo tape at the time, which I think Tony is still in the series. That's something else.
No!
And it turned out to be an episode of Pokemon, which was by 4Kids, and they eventually remembered me for when the other 4Kids TV stuff happened, and then I got in and read for a role on Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't get that, but got later stuff on Yu-Gi-Oh! And did other stuff at 4Kids, and it was part of the 4Kids talent pool. And that's that.
And last but not least.
I grew up in the Midwest, but I had an uncle who was an actor who lived in New York City. And when I was 12, I started to visit him. I'd spent a couple weeks with him, and he'd take me around to auditions. I saw a lot of theater, and I just idolized him. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be an actor. So I applied to theater schools, and I ended up going. He had studied with this guy, Bill Esper, who's a pretty well-known acting teacher.
William Esper.
Yeah.
William Esper.
Bill's E.
So he headed the program at Rutgers. That's how I ended up there. That's where I met Dan when we were both 18, several years ago. So we studied together. Obviously, we were best friends. Dan and I lived together all through college. We also lived with Tony Salerno, who was our other closest friend. He is definitely the nexus of this. So I graduated, and like Dan, was trying to do the whole thing and auditioning and trying to get work. And Tony was working in Central Park Media, and again brought me in for some of the anime. And I mean, I probably did something good at some point with anime, but I remember most of the initial stuff was just total crap. I didn't really know what was happening. But, he called one day and said, there's this company for kids, they're auditioning this show called Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I did initially get a part on the show, and then they ended up replacing Tristan. There was another actor named Sam Riegel that actually ended up playing Donatello on the Ninja Turtles, but he was the original Tristan, and for whatever reason, I forget if the network, someone didn't care for him, which happens sometimes, so they wanted to replace him maybe 10 or 12 episodes in. So I was lucky enough to get Tristan because, like the rest of everyone, once I was sort of in the door at 4Kids, not only did I get to meet all these cool people, but then you got to audition for everything else there, and so I had the opportunity to do, Ninja Turtles, everything they did, you sort of at least got on once or twice. So that was sort of my inroads to it.
Out of all the roles that you've played in the past, what's been your favorite?
Yusei was great just because he had a lot to do, a really strong character. I love doing Raphael and Ninja Turtles because, the Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, the dub stuff, you go into the booth by yourself. But with Turtles, they were doing from the ground up, which meant the actors were the first people to record, so they actually let the four of us go into the booth at the same time. So you sort of did it like a radio play. We would rehearse and then we would go in, which is always much nicer because you get to work off the other actors. Not only that, that's sort of where I met Wayne, who's now one of my closest friends. Mike, Sinter, Nicholas, and Sam, we were all, come on man, just play it, just pretend
Yes, we are bosom chums.
So I'd have to say Ninja Turtle just because it was the greatest job I've ever had, because once a week you got to go into the studio and record this cartoon with your friends, and it was awesome. Plus they had Pizza Wednesdays when we recorded it. And bagel fry.
I'm just going to jump the line because we're talking about Turtles, but Mikey was my favorite role, tied with Joey, because those were two great roles I had fun doing. Very, very freeing, very fun, very silly. And with Michelangelo, same thing that Greg was just saying, it was good to actually act and forge that kind of brotherhood, and with our Papa as well. Those are my two favorite roles.
So I'll go next, because I would say
Turtles.
Yeah, Splinter, just because it was from scratch, and there was a comedic element that I enjoyed, and then Pegasus, which was my first, which you kind of have a special place in your heart for.
I would say out of all of the roles that I've done as a voice actor, there was a project that came out in, I believe it was either the late 90s or the early 2000s, called Now and Then, Here and There. And it was the main role, a character named Shu, and it was just a great role to do. The project, the whole story, there was kind of an epic, almost tragic vibe to the story. And it was just a great way to kind of stretch, and it was also, actually, that was the project, I think, because again, that project was directed by Anthony Salerno, who's been mentioned. Who? And that was, I think, the project, I met Dan in the lobby. It was the very first time that I met you, so yeah, so that was my favorite.
I played a character, Lonai, in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. No, actually, I actually just had one episode, it was pretty...
You just want to do that.
But I worked on a show with Tony too, called Shaman King, and I played Lyserg, and I just loved working with Tony because he's just so flippin' funny. He just makes you laugh your ass off in the middle of your session, and just has a really good vibe of keeping the energy positive and like also delving into the story. So I enjoyed that role, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be, maybe not the fan favorite, but probably Luffy from One Piece, because I love being really goofy. Although people might look at me and think that's not the type of person that I am, but I love just to be off the cuff and silly and goofy, and I just loved how charismatic he was and how happy he was and gung-ho, and
Stretchy.
So, and stretchy. Yeah, it was very stretchy and gummy. It reminded me of my favorite gum, Big Red. But yeah, that's
Good job.
I truly do enjoy portraying both Yugi and the Pharaoh, and I think that I learned so much about a sense of range that I didn't even realize I had. I never had to talk that high before. I never had to talk that in that authoritative way before. So that was a lot of fun. And in another the now and then here and there, I got to play this character Naboka, and he had a really nice story arc, and it's a much more there's a much richer story. I got to have a death scene. That was great. So actors always like that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's tough to choose because every role offers its own thing. And another favorite was what we call a prelay show. That's when we're recorded first and they animate to you later as opposed to a dub, which is the reverse. I did a character called Hudson in a show called Viva Pinata, and I got to steal basically the voice of Fraser Crane and portray this really conceited guy, which came to me quite naturally. But again, it was a lot of fun. Oh, and there was also this one other thing. I did this dub, and it was from a show called Pat and Stan from France, and I got to play this one of the other main character. I just got to be so silly in a different way, because I would get, when you do a certain thing, people tend to think of you doing a certain kind of role, and so you're very often in consideration for that. You get cast as that, whatever. So I've gotten into this sort of consideration or pigeonhole or whatever of, you know, I'm the authoritative guy or the heroic guy or blah 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 blah, and that's great and that's fun. But you know, too much of any one thing can get kind of old. And so with that, I got to play this really effeminate, hysterical hippo. So I got to do things like that, and this is totally different than it's time to duel.
Come with me if you want to live.
So that was fun.
I like the characters with voices that make me laugh, because I'm having tremendous fun when I'm in the booth doing stuff. Having grown up in the Long Island, the wilds of Long Island, there are a lot of people with Long Island accents. So the New York tri-state area characters, like Meat and Ultimate Muscle, which is basically a big truck driver. And just hearing this voice every day coming out of my mouth makes me laugh. And the characters that were based on that, of course, from GX Bonaparte, was basically the effeminate meat, more or less sort of a Harvey Firestein effeminate meat thing. And
effeminate meat.
Yes. You have three
I think that's that near my autobiography, essentially.
And in a similar vein, the role of Ella the Maid in Sonic X. Because I got to play a big, large maid-type woman, and that was just brilliant casting. So, if it laughs, I'm there.
And then if you could have a choice of any role that you could play, what role would it be? And let's start with Greg.
Effeminate meat. Just hearing it now, I have a slight tingle going up my leg, so I'm gonna go with effeminate meat. Also known as the Ted Lewis story.
Anything big in theatrical, because theatrical cartoons are a big thing now, and Disney hasn't called me yet. But if they do, that'd be nice.
Oh, they called you. They just called you certain things.
Yeah.
I mentioned this yesterday. Apologies to people that were here. I would actually love to do more Pharaoh Yugi stuff and have a different story arc for them to explore. That would really be fun. But
me?
Yes, Greg.
Hint. I also like comic books and sci-fi, so I'd love to give Captain America a go, and I would love to do Spider-Man. I'm not right for his voice type. If there were an animated Han Solo, that would be a kind of dream come true. And maybe Leia.
Scenes with yourself.
I don't know. I like, also like Mike, I love crazy off-the-cuff characters that are very different from me. So, I mean, I guess I could just talk about one character that I was inspired by, and that's Ursula in The Little Mermaid, just the way Pat Carroll played her. I don't think anybody to this day has played any character as brilliant as that one. And so, I don't know, that would be fun to play something like that. But I couldn't do it as good as her, so what's the point? I mean, I like a lot of blabber. They think a girl who gossips is a bull.
Follow that.
Oh, we can.
Basically, people, I'll take anything, really. I haven't worked in a year.
It's a lie. It's a lie.
Yeah, I'm serious. But I would say I can't say that there's any particular role that I love to play, but I'm kind of echoing what's been said previously. I love doing comedy, and I don't get to do it as much as I'd like. So really, anything that's big and fun and you know, broad comedy and that kind of thing is really fun for me. So yeah. But really, anyone having to work for me, let me know.
I guess I have sort of a similar answer to Ted. Like, and whenever, you know, going through a Yu-Gi-Oh episode, there's so many serious moments that the funny comedic moments that we can pump out of a scene are the most important ones to me. And I think the actors enjoy them the most, and I like directing them the most. And so I'd want to be one of those funny guys. Non-specific answer.
Well, while I have played characters that have done heroic things, I don't think I've ever played a straight-up hero. And I'd like to, just to depart from what these two fellows said, I kind of like to go more subtle and do more like straight-up acting things. I've done the goofy thing, and it's fun, and I love it, and I wouldn't turn it down. But to just do things that are a little more introspective. I was always really pleased to do Joey's scenes where he would be talking about his friendship with Yugi or his sister Tsume. Just things that were a little more heartfelt, you know. And but beyond that, I'd also like to do a superhero, Daredevil or Spider-Man.
I always wanted to hear you as Spider-Man.
I always wanted to do it.
You always wanted to be dressed as Spider-Man, which is interesting.
I always wanted to do a superhero too, just so you know.
Your time has passed. You sang. Take a bow. Yes, ma'am.
Characters in several years, so it's kind of like revisiting with old friends, and they made, I think, Yugi just a little bit older in that one, which was, I think, interesting. But yeah, when you get very familiar with inhabiting a certain mentality, a certain kind of role, it becomes a habit, and if it's one that you have good associations with, you miss it when you don't do it anymore. And for me to do things like Yami Yugi and Yugi without the excuse of being in a sound booth, people would look at me strangely. Why is that guy yelling, doing those things? So
stop throwing cards.
No, the end of the world is near. We must. Somebody get that guy. The end of the world. So it was great to be able to revisit those guys, and I also agree that the story elements were, I think, really cohesive, and it was nice to have that extra dimension to it. No pun intended. In addition to the dueling. So.
And sorry, I forgot about Darren. Darren, you were in that too.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure of directing the guys. I think that the most challenging thing for me, from a directing point of view, was that the three leads from the three different shows, I think each sort of had I don't know if your acting approaches are different from one another, but the results were different. You know, Jaden's up here, and Yusei's the most cool, calm, collected, chill out one of them all, and Yugi's our hero, and finding a way that they can all talk to each other, and it for not to be different levels of manic or sedate was a good challenge that they pulled off.
I think I had 3 different characters in that, but they all had less than 3 lines.
Well, you did them great.
But it was cool to do Dark Magician Girl just because she was only in like 2 episodes ever, so she got to show up in that. So that was kind of fun.
I had only a very small part in this one. People I haven't worked in 5 years. Okay. But
we cut most of your scenes.
Yeah.
I had heard of the film.
And did you watch it?
I heard of the film.